Hello friends, this case is not suitable for people under 16 years old. A young girl enters the real world with her dreams. She was always in love with football players and wanted to marry one of them. And it was because of these dreams that she got drawn into acting in adult films. And that's where the story begins. Eliza was born on February 22nd, 1987, near the city of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Her father, Luiz Carlos Samudio, was an architect, and her mother, Fatima, worked on a farm. But their life didn't go very smoothly. In fact, they weren't happy together, and when Eliza was just 6 months old, they separated. Luiz was a bad-tempered man. He used to beat his wife a lot, and many times during these beatings, Luiz didn't want his daughter to be raised by Fatima. Because of this, in a way, he was threatening his wife. He told her, "The only way you can have custody of your daughter is if I'm dead." Out of fear for her daughter's life, after a lot of struggle, Fatima agrees to leave the house without her daughter. After a while, Fatima buys a farm and starts running it. There, she marries a man she knew. They had a son together. Maybe because of the problems Luiz caused or other issues, Fatima could rarely see her daughter, and this was a really heavy blow for Eliza. When Eliza was 10 years old, her mother made up her mind one day, gathered all the courage she could find in herself, and without her ex-husband's permission, took her daughter and brought her to live with her. Eliza quickly bonded with her half-brother and stepfather. After a while, they all got along really well. They were living a happy and peaceful life together. But this little family didn't last more than a year, because Luiz showed up again and threatened the little girl, saying he'd either punish her or she had to return home immediately. But Eliza absolutely didn't want to do that, because her father was a strict and ill-tempered man. When Eliza became a teenager, things got even harder for her. For example, her father forced her to entertain his friends in exchange for some money. Eliza's days went by with things like this until she turned 18 and decided to move to Sao Paulo. Her main goal was to become a model and marry a football player. Because ever since she was a kid, she was crazy about soccer and dreamed of starting a family with a professional football player. When she arrived in Sao Paulo, her pockets were almost empty, and she didn't know anyone there. She wanted to get a job there, but unfortunately, things didn't go the way she hoped at all, and she couldn't find any work in that field. All these failures made her decide to act in adult films, but at the same time, she kept trying to find modeling jobs. Her photos were even published a few times in Brazilian newspapers, and by acting in those films, she managed to land a few modeling gigs. Through modeling, she was able to attend several events and parties with famous people and got to know a lot of people. One of those people was someone named Bruno Fernandes de Souza. This man was born in 1984 in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. He was the goalkeeper for a club team in Brazil. Now, there's no information available about how or when they met. Bruno was never able to specify a particular time or place for when they met, but their friends say they met at a barbecue party in 2008. Later on, Bruno himself kind of confirmed that. But a while later, he denied it again and said they actually met at a nightclub where Eliza was working as a sex model. The idea is that Bruno and Eliza really were together in a place like that, and then they started a close relationship afterwards. And the point is, apparently they used birth control in their relationship. But it seems that one time when Bruno was with Eliza, he finished inside. Bruno's affair with Eliza happened while he was already married to another woman. At that time, Bruno was playing as a goalkeeper for a club team called Flamengo. The truth is, his life was so complete that he wasn't looking for any new relationships, and basically, he didn't want his name to be tarnished or become a target for journalists. But despite all that, he kept promising Eliza that he was willing to divorce his wife for her and that one day he would marry her. There were many times when Bruno would stay over at Eliza's place at night, and they spent a lot of time together. Their relationship lasted for months until one day Eliza told Bruno that she was pregnant. When she saw Bruno's shocked face, she said it was probably because of that night when the condom broke. Bruno was really scared when he heard the news and asked Eliza to have an abortion. He even found several people to gain Eliza's trust and convince her to have an abortion. But Eliza wouldn't agree at all and was determined to keep the baby and become a mother. Maybe all of this was just her childhood dreams, marrying a famous football player and having a child. But in reality, Eliza was just one of several people Bruno was involved with, and some of his other affairs led to a huge scandal, which ultimately caused their relationship to end very quickly. In October of that same year, Eliza went to the police and filed a complaint against Bruno, claiming that he had pressured her several times and even tried to kidnap her. Eliza quickly started giving interviews to the press and even appeared on a TV show as Bruno's secret lover. On that TV show, she even claimed that Bruno was a terrifying person and that she lived in fear and anxiety, always worried that he might do something terrible to her. Eliza even alleged that Bruno had put drugs in her food to control her, and all these claims were included in the police report. The story became really controversial and eventually ended up in court, but the court did not pursue all of Eliza's claims against Bruno. In the end, the court ordered that Bruno was not allowed to come within 300 meters of Eliza. However, this wasn't enough for Eliza, and she requested additional protection from the court. But the judge believed that there was no need at all, since not a single word was mentioned about Eliza's pregnancy during the court proceedings. After the court case, Eliza asked Bruno for supplies and money to get through her pregnancy, but Bruno rejected her request and said, "This child isn't mine. It could belong to anyone else." Bruno's reasoning for saying this was that Eliza had a chaotic lifestyle. But Eliza insisted that when she was involved with Bruno, there was no one else. He was the only person in her life at that time. But Bruno wouldn't listen and denied everything. In 2010, Eliza was taken to a hospital in Sao Paulo, and that's where her son was born. Bruno paid for all the medical expenses, but he said he didn't want any connection with either Eliza or his child. Still, he wanted to see his child after 4 months. Eliza wanted to give the baby Bruno's last name, so she suggested to Bruno that he could prove the child was his with a DNA test. This time, Bruno agreed. According to Eliza's family's lawyer, June 4th, 2010 was the last time Eliza spoke with her family and friends. And from what Eliza had said, apparently Bruno even bought her a house so that Eliza and Bruno could live more comfortably. And since Bruno had started having a normal relationship with them, Eliza stopped pursuing the DNA test as well. June 5th, 2010 was the last time Bruno played with his team, and on the other hand, Eliza's friends were getting worried about her because she wasn't answering her phone calls. Meanwhile, even though Eliza and her mother weren't very close, her mother also started wondering why Eliza hadn't called in a long time and hadn't given any news about herself or her child. Gradually, the situation reached the police, and they also started looking for Eliza. Naturally, the story quickly caught the attention of the media as well. A lot of questions were directed at Bruno. He kept saying that he knew Eliza, but he wasn't the father of her child, and that his relationship with Eliza was actually very superficial. Meanwhile, the police couldn't find any clues linking Eliza's disappearance to Bruno, but even so, from Bruno's behavior, they could tell that he knew something and wasn't saying it. It wasn't until June 24th that a lead in this case finally emerged. An anonymous person called the police and said that Eliza had been killed, all her clothes had been burned, and her body was buried in Bruno's yard. But despite this phone call, the police couldn't get a search warrant for Bruno's yard from the judge. It was as if the judge was still looking for more solid and convincing evidence. Of course, there was another reason as well. That reason was that Bruno was a very famous football player, and the police didn't want to rush things and give Bruno an excuse to accuse them of incompetence. That's why this time the police were very careful to make sure the news about the phone call didn't get out. Of course, the police didn't just sit around either, and on June 26, 2010, only 2 days after installing their listening device, they heard the sound of a baby coming from inside the house, and everyone guessed that it was Eliza's child. Eliza's son was at home with a woman named Fernanda Castro. Apparently, Fernanda was Bruno's new girlfriend. She said that Bruno's wife had entrusted the child to them to take care of. The police, finding this story really strange, wanted to interrogate Bruno and his wife, but it didn't lead to any particular result because they didn't answer any of the questions, and during the police interrogation, the whole team had really prepared themselves. On June 28th, the police interrogated Fernanda. Bruno and his wife still hadn't responded. However, the judge starts to have doubts about the case and finally agrees to issue a warrant to search the estate. When they search the house, they find old children's clothes and women's clothing. They also found some blood stains in Bruno's car, which, after testing, turned out to belong to Eliza. And they even found a pair of sunglasses and a high-heeled shoe in the car, which Eliza's friends immediately recognized. All the police agreed that there was enough evidence to charge Bruno with Eliza's disappearance. But despite all this evidence, the judge wasn't convinced, and the case hit a dead end. On July 6th of that same year, it was as if an important piece of the puzzle in this case was solved. The police arrested a 17-year-old boy named Sergio. Sergio was actually Bruno's cousin. He told the police an incredibly strange and at the same time terrifying story. According to his statements, he was involved in Eliza's murder, and Bruno had planned the whole thing from start to finish. And it was actually Sergio himself who had anonymously called the police on June 24th and provided them with information about Eliza's murder and Bruno's involvement. Along with Sergio, 2 other people were also involved in this murder. One of them was Bruno's close friend, and the other had become a strange kind of killer. According to Sergio, Bruno wanted to get rid of this troublesome girl because she was putting too much pressure on him, and he was afraid she might leak a lot of sensitive and confidential information to the press. That's why he went ahead, and under pressure, Sergio revealed all the information he had to the police, down to the smallest details. He said that Bruno invited Eliza to one of his houses to talk about the child's expenses, the DNA test, and the child's last name. Since Eliza didn't have a car, Bruno sent a driver to pick her up. And that driver was none other than Bruno's close friend, Luis Enrique Freira. But Freira's real goal wasn't just to take her to Bruno. His aim was to get rid of that girl for good. That way, Bruno wouldn't have to pay alimony or risk his reputation and marriage being tarnished. In the car, Eliza and her child were sitting in the back, and Bruno had even given Sergio a gun. But after a while, Eliza started to get suspicious of them, and after an argument about what they were doing, things escalated into a fight. Right then and there, Sergio attacked Eliza with the gun, but Eliza managed to quickly snatch the gun from Sergio and fired it at him. But unfortunately, the gun wasn't loaded, and in fact, it had only been given to Sergio to scare Eliza. They managed to get Eliza under control. Bruno, without paying attention to Eliza, gathered their things like the others, and then ordered them to take Eliza away and finish the job, but made it clear that the child must not be harmed. After that, Bruno quickly left the place and returned to Rio de Janeiro. Sergio said that Bruno had given each of them $1,700, and then asked them to take Eliza to an address where a man was waiting for them in a house. When they arrived there with Eliza, a man named Marcos Apreciados was waiting for them. This man used to be a police officer himself, but after he was fired from the police department, he turned to crime, and his job became disposing of bodies for criminals. Everyone who knew him said he did his job very cleanly. He never left any trace or clue for the police to find him. That's how it happened that after Marcos captured Eliza, he started torturing her horribly. It's not clear how many days Eliza was in Marcos's hands and being tortured. Of course, it should be mentioned that there are several claims about this matter, because Sergio kept changing his confessions to the police, and some of what he said contradicted the official information the police had. For example, according to some of his statements, on June 8th, when Eliza was still alive, they forced her to call several of her friends and tell them that she and her baby were fine, and that Bruno accepted responsibility for being the father of the child and agreed to all of Eliza's requests. And they even forced her to say that she was planning to leave the country soon. But interestingly, Eliza's friends said they never received any such call. However, Eliza's family lawyer said the last time she spoke with her family was on June 4th. Sergio said somewhere that after hours of torture, Eliza was still begging to be allowed to live, and it was at that moment that Marcos strangled her with a tie. After that, Sergio gives the child to Bruno, and Bruno leaves the place. Then Marcos dismembers Eliza's body, puts the pieces in several black plastic bags, and takes them to 4 Rottweiler dogs. According to Sergio, first, when Eliza's hand was completely eaten, Marcos threw the rest of her body to the dogs, and in this way, Eliza's body became food for the dogs. Only her bones were left, which they then gathered and took to Bruno's yard to bury them. But as I mentioned, the police found a lot of inconsistencies in Sergio's statements. Because according to Sergio himself, the rest of Eliza's body was buried right there in Bruno's yard, but they couldn't find any bones there. After Sergio's confessions, the judge finally agreed to arrest Bruno and the others involved in the murder. On June 19th, the police go to Bruno's yard, but just a few hours later, Bruno and his close friend go to the police station and turn themselves in. They only did this because of a suggestion from Bruno's lawyer. In fact, this was the best thing they could do. He only did it for his reputation. It was better for them to turn themselves in than for the police to show up at their door and arrest them. But still, Bruno insisted that he was completely innocent and had nothing to do with the murder. At the time of Bruno's arrest, his contract with his club hadn't been terminated yet, but since his case was getting more attention every day and more details were reaching the press, his club officially terminated his contract on July 15th. Most people in Brazil were preoccupied with the horrifying story of their famous footballer's life, and since Bruno was very famous at that time, all the stories that Sergio had told were published in newspapers and magazines. Because people were very curious to know whether the police would find Eliza's remains, and whether that famous footballer had really done such a thing or not. At the same time as Eliza's court proceedings were underway, Eliza's mother was involved in a separate court case to gain custody of the child. At first, custody of the child was given to Eliza's father because he was the last person the teenage Eliza had lived with. But Eliza's mother, Fatima, quickly appealed to the court and requested that custody be given to her because she didn't want the child to grow up in the same conditions her daughter had. The judge also took custody of the child away from Luis Carlos, Eliza's father, because sometime earlier he had harassed a 10-year-old girl and the case had gone to court. For this reason, the child was entrusted to her grandmother, Fatima. In the next step, Fatima requested a DNA test to make sure whether Bruno was the child's father or not. It was quickly confirmed that Bruno Fernandez was the father of the child. Now the police were desperately searching for Eliza's remains so they could prove Bruno's guilt. The police searched everywhere. They searched every place they thought the bones might have been buried. But they didn't find anything. In the end, though, 6 people were arrested. Besides Bruno and his wife, his new lover was also arrested, the one I mentioned earlier who was supposed to take care of the child for a while. After months of court proceedings, Marcos, Eliza's killer, was sentenced to 19 years in prison, plus an additional 3 years for hiding Eliza's remains. Fernanda Gomez, Bruno's lover, was sentenced to 5 years in prison because she had some information that she didn't give to the police, and besides that, when she was arrested, Eliza's child was with her. But the court process for Bruno and his wife took much longer because they kept appealing the court's verdict, and after each verdict, they would request a retrial, constantly insisting that they weren't that involved. But in the end, Bruno's wife's innocence was proven and she was released without any conviction. Sergio, Bruno's cousin, was an important witness in this case, and since he had helped the police and was only 17 years old, the judge found him innocent. Honestly, I was shocked here myself, because despite Sergio admitting that he had forced Eliza to go to the bathroom at gunpoint, he was still found innocent. But interestingly, you should know that in 2002, when Sergio was going from home to work, a motorcyclist was following him, and that same motorcyclist ran him over, and as a result of this accident, he lost his life. And just like that, the police lost their most important witness in this case. Bruno was sentenced to 23 years in prison in 2013. But in 2017, after many appeals, he was released by the court's decision. Just 4 days after his release, he joined a new club called Power Sport. On April 18, 2018, he officially started playing, but with Bruno joining the team, the club lost all of its sponsors. On April 25th, the appeals court withdrew its support and ordered Bruno to return to prison and serve his full sentence. But Bruno and his lawyers kept putting more pressure on the court, claiming there wasn't enough evidence to prove he did anything to Eliza. However, the new judge said that the traces of Eliza's blood found in Bruno's car were enough to prove he was involved in her murder, and so he had to serve the rest of his sentence. But if he told them where Eliza's remaining bones were, they could reduce his sentence. But this footballer kept insisting on his innocence. In 2019, Bruno's lawyer finally managed to do everything he could and got the best possible verdict for Bruno. That meant he was free during the day, but he still had to return to prison at night. A new club called Boa Sport signed a contract with Bruno. But after a few games, they terminated his contract. Because Bruno couldn't be fully present, he had to return to prison at night. He wasn't able to be active enough for the club. Bruno is still serving his sentence to this day and is looking for a club that can hire him under these circumstances. Unfortunately, to this day, it's still not clear where the remains of Eliza Samudio are. Sergio, too, was killed under very suspicious circumstances. Bruno still insists that he is innocent. Now he's divorced his wife and married another woman. Their wedding ceremony was even held in prison. And with this arrangement of partial freedom and prison, he has a small family of his own, and the amount of time he's allowed out during the day has even increased recently. Because of this, he can even work and spend more time with his family. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Fatima is still searching for the remains of her daughter. Please, I really want you to write your thoughts about this case for me in the comments. Thank you.